Thank you so much, Professor, for accepting this invitation of being present on our show. I'm talking to Professor Gilles Emmanuel Jacquet, Professor of Diplomacy and International Relations in Geneva. Professor, I would like to start talking about this war in Ukraine. Do you think this war is an imminent war in Ukraine?
Well, thank you very much, first of all, Anna Maria, for your invitation. Now, with regard to the conflict in Ukraine, well, there is already a war, a limited war, limited, let's say, to eastern Ukraine, to the region of Donbass. There is a military buildup on both sides, on the Ukrainian side and on the Russian side. However, I don't see a new war coming on. It's rather, let's say, a continuation of the already existing conflict we have in Ukraine.
And how do you think Romania is positioning itself in this situation? Are we in danger?
Well, first of all, I don't think Romania is in danger, and I don't think there will be Russian tanks coming in Romania soon. First of all, Romania is protected by its NATO membership. So if Romania is attacked, there will be a collective response.
And that is enough for the protection of our country?
It would be, but then as well, it's important to have a look at the other side, let's say the Russian point of view. And Russia, like many other countries, Russia is making, let's say, rational calculations, especially with regard to Romania. Russia has interest in Romania, in the energy sector, with trade, in the sector of finance, as well, banks, insurance. So attacking Romania wouldn't make sense for Russia, especially as there are not many big Russian interests in Romania. There is no significant Russian minority in Romania, for example.
But do you think, please,
yes?
Please.
Well, I think Romania may be affected in some ways because the situation will create regional tension. It may spark some fears in Romania, fears that may be related as well to collective and historical memory. It's making sense. But I don't see Russia attacking Romania soon.
So in this case, do you think that Romania is used as a pawn in the Ukrainian conflict?
Well, Romania may be used in a way or another by NATO to make pressure on Russia, especially as Romania is a neighbor of Ukraine. But I don't think it's in the best interest for Romania to see an escalation of the conflict, and it's not in the best interest of Romanian national security to be used by NATO in a conflict in Ukraine or against Russia.
Talking in concrete terms, how should Romania prepare itself? How do you think that the Prime Minister of Romania, Florin Câțu, will prepare the country for a possible attack?
Well, first of all, you have, let's say, military mobilization, you have preparedness. So if something happens, it's not going to be overnight. Romanian army is prepared. There are plans for the defense of the country. But I think things will happen on a more diplomatic level. And we have to keep in mind as well that even though there are bilateral contentious issues between Moscow and Bucharest, Romania is playing a very smart game with regard to Russia. Romania is not trying to antagonize Russia. It's rather trying to find a more balanced approach compared to other countries, and especially NATO members. So once again, there may be, military put on alert in Romania. There may be some mobilization, some drills. The intelligence service will maybe look in a more cautious way at what is going on. But honestly, I think, once again, as Romania is behind or under, let's say, under the NATO umbrella, I think it's safe. It's safe.
And do you think that this political game will properly be played also by the Prime Minister of Romania, Florin Câțu?
I don't know. I couldn't say. I don't have enough information on that. But once again, I don't think it's in the best interest of the government to escalate tensions with Russia with regard to Ukraine. It wouldn't be a good thing.
So is Romania protected enough only by the status of being a NATO country?
Well, first of all, it's a strong deterring element. Attacking a NATO country means facing collective retaliation. And Russia is aware about that, and Russia is not looking for, let's say, war on a European scale, a war between NATO and Russia. That wouldn't make sense. First of all, Romania is well protected by NATO, and Romania has its own armed forces. They are trained, they have modern equipment, and they have fought as well in foreign operations abroad. So I don't think Romania is in big danger. I don't think so.
In case of an attack, how long would it take the alliance to respond? If one of the NATO states are attacked, how long would the political decision take, per se?
Well, the military response would be made in less than a week. It's important, less than a week. Otherwise, you would let, let's say, the enemy advancing. So a quick response is what will do NATO. Now, with regard to the political response or diplomatic response, it may take some more time. Well, politically, NATO intervention or NATO reaction will be allowed, but then usually governments will try as well to find political ways to settle the crisis. So there will be as well diplomats being mobilized. It won't be just about military reaction, but for the military reaction, it should be done in less than a week, within a week.
And in this case, do you think that the weakness of others can contribute to the endangering of our country? Do you think that the war in Ukraine may seem imminent precisely because of weak leaders?
I think it's not really about the strength or the weaknesses of leaders, it's rather about their vision. And it's important in this case as well to see that in Ukraine, President Zelensky was elected originally on a peace platform. He wanted to peacefully settle the situation in Donbass, especially as he was aware that the conflict could last for many years, and that the population in Donbass, the Russian-speaking population, that is a majority in this area, was asking for autonomy and linguistic rights. I rather think it's about the vision leaders have, and I think it's time for most leaders in Europe, should it be in Western or Eastern Europe, to get out of this old Cold War mentality, because it's very detrimental to all Europeans and especially the security of our continent.
How great is the proportion that this conflict can take on a geopolitical landscape?
Well, it already has regional repercussions. You have tensions in the Black Sea, and it's important as well to understand that Turkey as well may use this tension against Russia to make some pressure against Russia. We have as well to see the effects on Romania and Moldova. You know, Ukraine is in a way a fragile country, and it has a lot of ethnic minorities. You have a lot of Russian-speaking populations in eastern, but as well in most of southern Ukraine, in northern Ukraine as well. And in western Ukraine, you have regions where you have significant and even important Romanian-speaking populations and Moldovan minorities, such as in the region of Ismail and Cetatea Alba. So these regions as well that belonged in the past to Romania. So there may be regional repercussions, but it's hard to foresee how they will impact some countries. I think, but in the end, for most of the countries in the region, they will look for a diplomatic solution, especially as you have a lot of trade in the region. Trade can be seriously affected by the regional repercussions of the conflict.
Taking a look at Turkey, will Turkey play Russia in the Black Sea?
Turkey will try, in a way or another, to put some pressure on Russia. They have antagonistic interest, but they have as well, I'm not going to say common interest, but they have, in a way or another, to accommodate interest they have in common in the region, especially when it comes to the stability of the region, the Caucasus, the Black Sea, and as well Syria. Because in Syria, Russia and Turkey may have antagonistic agendas, but they are forced as well to deal with each other. And they made agreements, especially with regard to the situation in northern Syria. So Turkey will, in a way or another, use this situation to make some pressure on Russia to take more autonomy with regard to Russia. But at the same time, Turkey has a lot of interest in common with Russia when it comes to trade, especially to bilateral trade. and along, let's say, these last years, Turkey bought military equipment to Russia. Turkey is rather trying, in fact, to play both NATO and Russia.
So is it in a vulnerable position?
Turkey could be, in the end, in a vulnerable position because some of the decisions of President Erdogan were met with some discontent in Moscow, but as well in Paris. And it's creating, in a way, some embarrassment in Washington or in Berlin, even though the US and Germany are not making a lot of pressure on Erdogan. So in the end, for Turkey, it could be a dangerous game. You can play, let's say, both with Russia and the US, but not to the point where it could lead to isolation.
Is the withdrawal from Afghanistan a sign that troops and weapons are needed in other areas, such as Ukraine?
I don't know if these troops and equipment that will be taken out of Afghanistan will be used in Ukraine. The withdrawal apparently is set for the 11th of September, so there is a delay with regard to the original schedule. I don't know if it will be sent, if these US troops from Afghanistan will be sent in Ukraine in September. I don't know, however, they could be sent in many other places where you have a US interest. So it's very hard to know where these troops will be deployed.
Taking a look at the current context of the COVID-19 pandemic, how can the pandemic influence military decisions?
Well, the COVID-19 pandemic, let's say, it may in a way create some issues within the military establishment. You have soldiers that should be vaccinated, soldiers who are sick you have to treat them. So the COVID-19 is not, in fact, really paralyzing military establishments, at least in Europe. In case of conflict, COVID-19 at the same time wouldn't slow down military preparation, mobilization, and deployment. COVID-19 is rather taken in military analysis as an element, as an analytical element. I mean that it's interesting as well for military establishments to see the effects of COVID-19 on adversary or enemy states, because then the way COVID-19 is destabilizing some societies, it could be useful for some military forces, for example.
The United States withdrew 2 warships that it intended to place in the Black Sea. On the other hand, Russia sent 15 warships from the Caspian Sea, after which it closed the Kerch Strait until October 2021. So now I want to ask you, can this be considered a sign of weakness on the part of NATO's most important ally?
It could be seen as a sign of weakness, but it can also be seen as a sign of, or a gesture of goodwill. In order to not escalate tensions, President Biden is planning, by the way, to meet President Putin, President Zelensky, and other European leaders in the next coming weeks or months. It's not clear when it will happen. However, it's clear in Washington now that they are looking for a de-escalation. It doesn't mean that the USA are weak or they are not facing their responsibilities, but they are rather trying to avoid, let's say, an unnecessary conflict and unnecessary tensions with Russia.
Former President Trump had advanced to May 1st as being the deadline for withdrawing troops from Afghanistan, but current U.S. President Joe Biden set a memorable date for September 11th. This deeply displeases the Taliban, who have resumed their attacks. The decision to withdraw from Afghanistan is, however, criticized by some commanders. How do you comment?
Well, there is no easy solution with regard to the Afghan conflict. The US troop withdrawal was long overdue. It was a very long promise of previous US presidents, but Donald Trump seemed to be serious about this commitment. There was a delay, and this delay was the main source of frustration on the side of the Taliban. With regard to the agreement made between the USA and the Taliban, the withdrawal of US troops was an important precondition to a final agreement and to a final settlement of the conflict. Now, in the Kabul government, but also among military experts, many people doubt about the genuine commitment of the Taliban after a withdrawal of foreign troops. Some experts believe that the withdrawal of foreign troops would just make the Afghan government weaker, and it would make things easier for the Taliban to take over, to seize power. At the same time, military operations showed that the war can last forever, and that there is, in the end, no military solution. The Taliban have been, affected by these military operations. Many Taliban leaders have been killed, but you still have Taliban fighters and new leaders coming on. One thing as well is that the Taliban are divided. Some Taliban agreed to negotiate, but others, we could say they are a minority, others refused to join the negotiations. And at the same time, the Taliban are engulfed in a bitter and ferocious rivalry with the Islamic State in Afghanistan. So it's very hard to see how this agreement as well could last, as it's endorsed by the leaders of the Taliban movement that are representing a big part of this movement, but you still have dissidents, and you have another threat posed by the Islamic State that is opposed to any kind of agreement. At the same time, preventing the Taliban from being part of the Afghan government would just give them arguments to restart the war. And at the same time, many people in Afghanistan, many minorities such as the Hazara, that are Shia Muslims, are scared to see the Taliban being back in power because they have been discriminated in the past and they don't want to see these things re-happening again in Afghanistan.
Professor, thank you very much for painting this very complex and critical political tableau for us. Thank you for your time, and we wish you all the best.
Mulțumesc!